How could a weapon deemed invincible, the legendary German 88mm anti-tank gun, suddenly fail against what looked like just another American Sherman tank? This wasn't just a battle question. It was a puzzle that cracked open a pivotal shift on the Western Front in late 1944. The 88mm was a beast of technology and reputation, feared by all. Yet, against an ordinary-looking Sherman, that fear began to falter. What happened here? Why did this master weapon, whose name echoed lethal certainty, start to miss its mark? This story sets the stage for one of World War II's most surprising tactical twists. A clash not just of guns and armor, but of intelligence, adaptation, and the unforeseen power of a simple disguise. This story is not about a single unbeatable weapon. Instead, it's about how industry adapted, intelligence faltered, and morale cracked under pressure. It's a tale of how relentless innovation faced unexpected blind spots, and how human psychology shaped the brutal dance of war. Here, technology alone wasn't enough. The real battle was won or lost in the fog of information and the minds of soldiers. This sets the stage for a journey into the hidden cracks and surprising twists that defined armored warfare in 1944. By late 1944, armored warfare on the Western Front had settled into a deadly rhythm, a brutal dance of steel on steel. Tank crews knew the stakes with every clash. It was a predictable calculus where the strongest guns and thickest armor ruled the battlefield. Each encounter echoed the same harsh reality, with survival often measured in inches of plating and the power behind each shell. This was no longer about chance. It was a brutal equation, carved into the mud and blood of Europe. The German 88mm gun, particularly the PaK-43 variant, dominated the battlefield with terrifying effectiveness. Its reputation was legendary strike from a distance, and enemy tanks would crumble under its unstoppable firepower. The gun originated as an anti-aircraft weapon, but its transformation into a tank killer made it the fearsome master of armored warfare. On the Western Front, it was the ultimate threat, a steel sentinel that seemed invincible. Every German crew wielding the 88mm carried absolute confidence, every shot counted, and every shot was a kill. This gun wasn't just a weapon, it was the cornerstone of German anti-tank tactics. Originally designed to blast enemy aircraft out of the sky, the German 88mm gun was no ordinary piece of artillery. Its engineers crafted it with an exceptionally high muzzle velocity, meaning each shell shot out at blistering speeds, piercing through the air and armor with lethal precision. This speed wasn't just a technical feat, it was the secret sauce that made the 88mm devastatingly effective against tanks. When those shells hit, they punched right through armor plating that other weapons could barely scratch. It was this incredible velocity that elevated the 88mm from a mere anti-aircraft wonder to the feared backbone of the German anti-tank arsenal. This high velocity was not just a technical feat. It transformed the 88mm into a formidable force on the battlefield. It allowed German crews to engage Allied tanks from great distances, often before the enemy even realized they were under fire. The shell pierced through thick armor like a hot knife through butter, leaving no room for error or escape. This range and penetrating power made the 88mm the ultimate anti-tank gun that German crews relied on with absolute confidence. For German gun crews, the 88mm wasn't just a weapon, it was a trusted extension of themselves. Every drill, every battle-tested tactic had reinforced their belief in its absolute superiority. To them, a direct hit from that gun was certain death for any Allied tank. This confidence shaped not only how they fired, but how they thought about the battlefield itself. The 88mm was their assurance of control, their guarantee that no Sherman, Panther, or Tiger could stand against it. It was an unshakable faith, one that blinded them to the threats quietly mounting just beyond their sights. It was a simple equation. One direct hit from the German 88mm gun on any Allied tank spelled instant destruction. The 88mm was feared for its incredible power and precision, an unstoppable force on the battlefield. For German crews, this was certainty. They trusted their weapon implicitly. Every shot counted as a guaranteed kill. No tank could withstand its deadly impact. This grim reality shaped the way battles were fought, reinforcing the idea that armored warfare was a straightforward contest where one well-placed shot decided life or death. This technological superiority formed the bedrock of German anti-tank doctrine. The 88mm gun wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of dominance, trusted implicitly by crews who had honed their skills around its lethal precision. Every engagement was planned with the confidence that a single, well-placed shot would neutralize any Allied armored threat. German strategies revolved around this certainty. Ambush tactics, long-range strikes, and disciplined fire control all leveraged the 88's unmatched firepower. It wasn't just about firepower, it was about psychology. The 88 shaped how German tankers thought, moved, and fought, anchoring their belief in battlefield invincibility. German tactics hinged on a deadly gamble, ambushes, and long-range engagements. This was their way to counter the Allies' shocking numerical superiority. They knew standing toe-to-toe meant certain defeat, so they laid traps in shadows, striking from afar with their fearsome 88mm guns. Every encounter was calculated, every shot designed to cripple before the enemy could react. Yet this reliance on distance and surprise was both a strength and a vulnerability waiting to be exposed. On the other side of the armored equation stood the American M4 Sherman tank. Unlike the German focus on technological supremacy, the Sherman embodied a different philosophy, one of sheer industrial might and mass production. Designed to be reliable, easy to maintain, and strategically mobile, it could be deployed across vast continents with remarkable efficiency. However, its armor was a glaring weakness. Late-war German weapons could easily punch through its frontal armor, turning the Sherman into a vulnerable target. This vulnerability forced the Americans to rethink tactics, leaning heavily on numbers and teamwork to offset the Sherman's fragility on the battlefield. The Sherman was more than just a tank. It was a rolling testament to American industrial power and philosophy. Unlike the German focus on elite weapons and precision engineering, the Sherman was built for mass production, designed to flood battlefields with reliable, easily repaired machines. It wasn't about perfection or unmatched firepower, it was about numbers, speed, and strategic flexibility. This approach meant that while the Sherman's armor was often vulnerable against late-war German tanks, its true strength lay in the sheer scale of deployment and the ability to keep forces moving across vast fronts. It was a different kind of weapon, one forged not in the workshop of elite craftsmanship, but in the roaring factories that powered the Allied war machine. The Sherman tank wasn't built to be a powerhouse on the battlefield. It was designed for mass production, reliability, and strategic mobility across continents. Instead of focusing on heavy armor or firepower, the priority was to churn out tanks that could be easily maintained, shipped worldwide, and quickly repaired. This approach reflected America's industrial strength, the ability to produce vast numbers of good enough tanks rather than a few perfect machines. The Sherman's versatility and availability became its real weapon in the Allied arsenal. Despite being mechanically reliable and easy to service in the field, the Sherman's armor was a glaring weak point. Against the late-war German weapons, especially the mighty 88mm guns and fearsome Panthers and Tigers, its frontal armor was like paper. One well-placed shot, and the Sherman was vulnerable. This mismatch created a grim reality for American tank crews, who knew that their machines couldn't stand toe-to-toe with the cutting edge of German firepower without paying a deadly price. By late 1944, the Sherman's frontal armor was simply not up to the task. German Panthers, Tigers, and their dreaded 88mm guns could punch right through it with brutal ease. It was a glaring weakness that haunted every American tank crew, no shield strong enough against these killers head-on. This vulnerability forced U.S. tankers to think differently, to outsmart the enemy with maneuver and numbers, because charging straight into an 88mm was almost always a death sentence. Worse, these German guns could kill a Sherman from ranges where the Sherman's own gun was completely ineffective. Imagine being a Sherman crew, peering through the periscope, knowing your best shot couldn't penetrate the enemy's armor, but the German 88mm could strike you down long before you even got the chance to fire. This deadly gap in firepower seared itself into the minds of American tankers, shaping how they fought, how they maneuvered, and how they survived on the brutal battlefields of late-war Europe. The Sherman's vulnerability was more than just a design flaw. It was a brutal reality that tank crews lived with every day. They called their tanks Ronson after the famous lighter slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." The nickname wasn't just dark humor, it was a grim acknowledgement that a single, well-placed German shot could ignite the Sherman in seconds. This haunting reputation shaped how American soldiers viewed their machines, aware that their odds often hinged more on luck than steel. It was a constant reminder that, despite its strengths, the Sherman carried a deadly weakness in the face of German firepower. American tactical doctrine was forced to reflect this harsh reality. Facing an enemy armed with the deadly 88mm gun, Sherman crews couldn't rely on armor or firepower alone. Instead, they learned to rely on numbers, coordination, and clever tactics. Teams would work together like wolves, surrounding German tanks and striking from the sides or rear where armor was weaker. Avoiding direct confrontations became a grim necessity. High losses were accepted as the price of momentum, with fresh Shermans rolling off American assembly lines to replace the fallen. It was a brutal balance, sheer numerical strength and tactical cunning over unmatched firepower. In the face of deadly German armor, American crews quickly realized strength lay not just in the individual tank, but in their numbers. They trained relentlessly to operate as cohesive wolf packs, striking with precision against the weaker side and rear armor of enemy tanks. This tactic was born from necessity. Shermans couldn't stand toe-to-toe in frontal combat with Panthers or Tigers, but by working together, exploiting angles, and coordinating attacks, they turned their vulnerabilities into advantages. It was a brutal dance of steel and strategy, where survival depended on teamwork, timing, and an unyielding will to outmaneuver superior firepower. Official doctrine was crystal clear: avoid head-on fights with German heavy armor whenever possible. American tank crews knew that charging straight into the deadly fire of Panthers, Tigers, or those infamous 88mm guns was a recipe for disaster. Instead, they relied on speed, strategy, and numbers, using maneuver and coordinated attacks to target weak spots like the sides or rear of enemy tanks. This wasn't just caution, it was survival. Facing down the steel giants of the German army meant playing smart, staying alive, and striking where it hurt the most. The U.S. strategy was stark and unyielding. High individual tank losses were simply accepted as the grim price of war. With no illusions about the Sherman's vulnerabilities, commanders placed their faith in the endless flood of replacements produced by American factories. This wasn't just a strategy of attrition, it was a calculated gamble rooted in industrial might. Each lost tank was quickly replaced, ensuring the tide of armored forces kept rolling forward. For the soldiers inside, it was a harsh reality. Survival depended more on numbers and luck than on armor or firepower. But this relentless production fueled an unstoppable momentum that would slowly but surely wear down the German war machine. Despite the grim reality that each Sherman lost often meant lives lost, these heavy casualties were offset by a relentless tide of replacements pouring out of American factories. Mass production was America's ace in the hole, where the enemy counted tanks one by one. The U.S. choked the battlefield with a steady stream of fresh machines and crews. This unforgiving industrial output turned battlefield losses into strategic gains, sheer numbers becoming a weapon in themselves. For every Sherman destroyed, another took its place, ensuring the war machine never slowed down. It was a ruthless arithmetic that transformed attrition into advantage, reshaping the brutal calculus of armored warfare. Here's the paradox that defined the brutal calculus of armored warfare. The Sherman tank was losing the fight, on the individual level, exposed, vulnerable, and often lethal to its own crew, but winning the war on the grand stage. How? Through relentless numbers and sheer attrition. America's industrial machine churned out nearly 50,000 Shermans, replacing lost tanks faster than the enemy could destroy them. This overwhelming production tide meant that, despite the lethal threats lurking on the battlefield, the Allies could sustain offensive pressure that German forces simply could not match. It was a grim testament to how quantity, backed by logistics and strategy, could triumph where individual quality faltered. For the crew inside, every mission was a gamble. Tank armor was their shield, yes, but luck often played the bigger role. Each battle's outcome could hinge on a fleeting moment, a glancing shot, a burst of enemy fire, or the chance that their tank's weak spot remained hidden. In a war where the Sherman's armor was fatally thin against German firepower, survival wasn't guaranteed by the machine. It depended on split-second decisions, terrain, and sometimes sheer fortune. This harsh reality defined the daily uncertainty faced by those behind the wheel, turning each advance into a test not just of skill, but of luck itself. The story of the M4A3E2 better known as the Jumbo, begins not from a grand design, but from a pressing battlefield necessity. It wasn't created as a direct counter to Germany's heavy tanks, but rather as an urgent, improvised answer to a separate challenge facing Allied forces. As planners looked toward the looming invasion of Normandy, they knew they needed a tank that could lead assaults and soak up enemy fire, something tougher, something to break through heavily fortified lines. Time was short, so instead of crafting an entirely new machine, the decision was made to reinforce the reliable M4A3 Sherman. This quick adaptation set the stage for a tank that would defy expectations and quietly reshape the fight. As the Allies prepared to storm the beaches of Normandy, their planners faced a daunting challenge. The German defenses were a fortress writ large, built to break any assault before it could gain ground. They needed a breakthrough, a tank that could lead the charge, shrug off punishing fire, and spearhead advances through the enemy's iron grip. Time was scarce, and building a new machine from scratch was impossible. So, the answer was to reinvent the familiar, to take the trusted M4 Sherman and transform it into an armored bastion capable of surviving where others would fall. This was the urgent mission driving the creation of what would become known as the Jumbo Sherman. As the Allies prepared for the monumental invasion of Normandy, planners recognized a daunting challenge ahead. The German defenses were a fortress, tough and unyielding. To punch through this lethal barrier, they needed more than just numbers. They needed a spearhead, an assault tank, designed not just to advance but to take hits head-on, shrugging off enemy fire that would cripple typical tanks. This tank would lead the charge, absorbing concentrated enemy fire to protect the forces behind it, turning deadly breaches into pathways for victory. Time was short, and the mission clear. Craft a tank that could endure the storm, endure the deadly hail of German fire, and press relentlessly forward. With no time for a completely new design, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department made a pivotal decision to build on what was already proven the reliable M4A3 Sherman chassis. This choice wasn't about innovation but pragmatism. They needed a tank that could hit the front lines fast. Instead of starting from scratch, they took the sturdy Sherman and began reinforcing it heavily. This was the seed that would grow into the fearsome Jumbo, a tank built not for speed or firepower, but for unmatched protection. It was a gamble, but one grounded in urgent necessity and the pressing realities of war. The solution was brutally straightforward. Weld an additional 1.5 inches, about 38 millimeters of steel plate onto the front and sides of the Sherman's hull. This wasn't some elaborate redesign or new invention. It was a simple, raw boost of armor where it counted most. By reinforcing those critical areas, the tank's front could better withstand direct hits from German weapons that had previously shredded its armor with ease. This meant the Sherman could now face down enemy fire with far greater resilience, turning an already reliable chassis into a formidable assault vehicle. It was a tough call, accepting that this extra protection would come with trade-offs, but the battlefield demanded a tank that could lead the charge and soak up the punishment heading the invasion. The standard cast turret that once crowned the Sherman was swapped out, replaced by a new, heavily armored design inspired by the T-23 prototype. This wasn't just a cosmetic change, it was a fortress of steel forged in response to the battlefield's brutal demands. The tougher turret faced down enemy fire with resilience, turning a once vulnerable target into a moving bastion. It was a calculated gamble, balancing added protection against weight constraints and mechanical stress, yet it symbolized a bold shift. This upgrade signaled that survival, not just firepower, was becoming the tank commander's new victory. Adding that extra 1.5 inches of steel wasn't just about thickness, it was about confidence, making the front line nearly impervious to hits that would normally punch right through standard armor. Imagine facing a wall of over 4 inches of solid steel, angled perfectly to deflect the deadly German shells. This upgrade transformed the M4A3E2 from a regular Sherman into a walking fortress, standing firm where others would fall. But this was just the beginning. The new armor promised survival against the very weapons that had made tanks vulnerable on the battlefield. The new turret face on the Jumbo Sherman was a fortress in its own right, nearly 7 inches or 178 millimeters of hardened steel. This wasn't just thicker armor, it was a declaration against the deadly German 88 millimeters, which had once been an unstoppable force. This tower of steel stood firm. The sheer mass of that metal wall defied expectation, challenging the very notion that a Sherman tank could be vulnerable to frontal shots. It was a jaw-dropping upgrade, one that transformed the Sherman from a lightly armored workhorse into a bruiser built to take the fiercest hits without faltering. This turret was no longer just a gun mount. It was a shield that rewrote the rules of engagement on the battlefield. With this armor upgrade, the Jumbo's frontal defense now rivaled the formidable German Tiger I tank. In some ways, it even surpassed it. Imagine a steel wall so thick and resilient, German shells that once promised certain kills now bounced harmlessly off. This was no mere incremental improvement. It was a quantum leap in protection. The Jumbo Sherman, once just another tank on the battlefield, transformed into a near-impenetrable fortress. This sudden shift redefined how American forces could face the German juggernauts head-on, altering both tactics and expectations in brutal armored combat. But this immense increase in armor came at a price. The added weight, nearly 9 extra tons, placed tremendous strain on the Sherman's chassis and its vertical volute spring suspension. What had once been a nimble and reliable tank now moved slower, its top speed noticeably reduced. Maneuverability suffered, making the Jumbo less agile on the battlefield. It was a trade-off: unparalleled protection up front, but diminished mobility overall. And that had cascading effects, influencing how crews employed the tank in combat, forcing commanders to weigh its brute survivability against the risk of it becoming an easy target due to reduced speed. Adding 9 tons of extra armor wasn't just about piling on steel, it came with a hefty price. The extra weight pushed the M4A3E2's chassis to its limits, straining every component beneath the tank. The vertical volute spring suspension, designed for a much lighter load, groaned under the burden, affecting mobility and putting mechanical reliability at risk. This was a soldier's tank that now had to balance protection with the harsh realities of physics, trading some agility for the crucial shield that could deflect those deadly 88mm rounds. The extra armor came at a cost. The Sherman Jumbo was no longer the nimble tank it once was. The added weight, an extra 9 tons, strained the chassis and the suspension system to their limits. While it could shrug off hits that would obliterate a standard Sherman, this newfound resilience meant sacrificing speed and maneuverability. On the battlefield, that slower pace was a trade-off commanders accepted willingly. After all, moving a few miles per hour slower felt insignificant compared to the difference between surviving a direct 88mm hit or being instantly destroyed. This reduction in mobility was a small price to pay for a tank that could lead assaults and soak up enemy fire like a fortress on tracks. To maximize its role as an assault tank, the Jumbo's designers made a key choice. It would keep the standard 75mm M3 gun. This wasn't because it was the best anti-tank weapon. In fact, against Panthers and Tigers, its firepower was lacking, but the 75mm high-explosive shells were vital for smashing through fortified positions and enemy infantry. So, the Jumbo traded raw firepower against heavy armor for a reliable, versatile weapon that complemented its heavy armor and assault mission. This decision shaped its unique tactical role, not a tank killer, but a fearless frontline battering ram. Though the Jumbo Sherman kept the standard 75mm M3 gun, this choice was far from a weakness. Its high-explosive shells were devastating against infantry and fortified positions, giving it a crucial role in breaking enemy lines. Yet, the 75mm was less formidable when facing Germany's heavy hitters like the Panther or Tiger tanks. It simply couldn't pierce their thick frontal armor. This created a glaring capability gap on the battlefield, a tank heavily armored but with firepower not fully matching its protection, forcing crews to rely on strategy and support to handle those deadlier enemies. Yet despite retaining this familiar 75mm M3 gun, valued for its high explosive shells against infantry and fortifications, the Jumbo faced a glaring shortfall. This weapon was largely ineffective against the thick frontal armor of the Panther and Tiger tanks. This created a dangerous gap in capability, limiting the Jumbo's role in tank versus tank combat, even as its armor promised unprecedented survivability. It was a calculated trade-off favoring protection over firepower that defined the Jumbo's unique place on the battlefield. Production of this specialized variant was also extremely limited. Only 254 of these heavily armored Jumbos rolled off the assembly lines, a minuscule fraction compared to the nearly 50,000 Shermans built overall. Steel shortages and a wartime focus on mass-producing standard tanks meant there simply wasn't room nor time for a large-scale rollout. This rarity would ironically become one of the Jumbo's greatest strengths, keeping it under the radar and allowing it to catch German forces off guard in critical moments. Wartime steel shortages and a relentless focus on producing standard Sherman tanks meant the M4A3E2 Jumbo remained an extraordinarily rare sight on the battlefield. Only 254 were ever built, a tiny fraction of the nearly 50,000 Shermans rolling off American assembly lines. This scarcity limited its influence, but also added to its mystery. Outnumbered and outpaced by mass production priorities, the Jumbo was a heavyweight champion in a world dominated by quantity over sheer quality. Its rarity would play a key role in why German forces struggled to recognize just how different and dangerous this normal-looking Sherman really was. Producing only 254 Jumbo Shermans might sound like a small footnote in the vast story of World War II. But consider this. These tanks accounted for less than half of 1% of the nearly 50,000 Shermans rolled out from American factories. Despite their rarity, they carried a tremendous impact far beyond their numbers. This scarcity wasn't just a result of strategic choice, it was shaped by wartime steel shortages and the relentless focus on standard tank production. In a war defined by mass, the Jumbo was an elite exception, a heavily armored outlier, quietly slipping into the armored ranks, ready to surprise the enemy when it mattered most. Arriving in Europe after the D-Day landings, the Jumbos didn't form elite tank battalions or squadrons. Instead, they were sprinkled sparingly throughout armored divisions, usually just one per company. This subtle dispersal turned each Jumbo into a rare, almost ghostly presence on the battlefield, unnoticed by most, but ready to absorb enemy fire where it counted most. Their scarcity and blending with regular Shermans became, in itself, a hidden strength, setting the stage for the surprise and confusion that German forces would soon face. The Jumbo Shermans weren't assembled in large, elite battalions. Instead, they were scattered in sparse numbers, often just a single tank per company, integrated quietly across several armored divisions. This subtle dispersal kept them under the radar, their striking strength hidden within the familiar silhouette of the ordinary Sherman. On the chaotic battlefields of late 1944, this distribution proved a stroke of tactical genius. The Germans were left confused, unable to pinpoint or predict the presence of these heavily armored giants amidst the flood of standard Shermans. In this way, the Jumbo's true power wasn't just its armor, it was its very anonymity, a ghost in the armored crowd that shattered expectations and sowed uncertainty in enemy ranks. The Jumbo Shermans were sprinkled sparingly across the front lines, never massed, never overwhelming in number. This careful scattering meant that spotting one was a rare event for German crews, almost like a fleeting rumor whispered in the chaos of war. Their armor was thicker, tougher, an unseen shield that masked itself behind the familiar shape of a Sherman tank. So, when German gunners aimed their deadly 88mm shells, they expected the usual result, a swift, clean kill. But the Jumbo's reinforced armor turned those deadly shots into echoes of frustration. Initially, they saw no difference, but that first baffling failure planted a seed of doubt. How would the German forces react when reality collided with the unexpected resilience of this heavy-hitting newcomer? The Jumbo Sherman's greatest weapon wasn't just its heavy armor, it was the fact that the Germans didn't even realize it was different. Camouflaged by familiarity, it blended into the sea of ordinary Shermans on the battlefield. To German gunners, it was just another target one they were certain their trusted 88mm gun could dispatch with ease. This anonymity turned into a deadly advantage. The Germans faced not a new tank, but a ghost of their own expectations, a threat hiding in plain sight. In those crucial moments, what looked like a familiar enemy was actually something much tougher, catching them off guard and undermining their confidence. German intelligence's failure to spot the Jumbo Sherman for what it truly was, a heavily armored threat, proved catastrophic. This wasn't just a minor oversight, it represented one of the most significant intelligence blunders of the war. The Germans simply didn't recognize the Jumbo as a new breed of tank. To them, it looked like just another familiar Sherman, easy prey for their once feared 88mm gun. This blind spot allowed the Jumbo to slip through their defenses, catching crews off guard and undermining their confidence at crucial moments. In a war where information was power, this failure to adapt and identify changed the battlefield in ways the Germans hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just a simple intelligence misstep, it was a deep, systemic collapse of German intelligence on the Western Front. Their once sharp eyes and ears had grown blind and deaf, networks broken. Reconnaissance flights grounded by Allied air dominance, trusted informants silenced or turned. The enemy's information grid, once a tightly woven web, had frayed into chaos. Without solid data, German commanders had no clear picture of what the Americans were fielding. This intelligence blackout sealed their fate, keeping them in the dark about the formidable armored threat quietly rolling through their lines. By late 1944, Germany's military intelligence apparatus was in utter disarray, almost blind to what was unfolding before them. Years of relentless Allied bombing had shattered their reconnaissance capabilities, grounding Luftwaffe aircraft that once scouted every Allied move. Their once feared Abwehr had been gutted and absorbed by the SS, leaving few reliable eyes and ears behind enemy lines. Human intelligence networks, once proficient and far-reaching, had been dismantled or compromised, making it nearly impossible to gather fresh information. This vacuum created a dangerous fog of war, where new American innovations like the heavily armored Jumbo Sherman slipped through unnoticed. Germany's battlefield awareness was crumbling just when it was needed most, setting the stage for devastating tactical surprises. This lack of reliable intelligence crippled Germany's ability to anticipate or counter evolving threats on the Western Front, setting the stage for critical surprises ahead. By late 1944, the German intelligence agency, known as the Abwehr, was no longer the formidable force it once was. It had been systematically dismantled, compromised by Allied espionage, and ultimately absorbed into the SS, stripping it of autonomy and effectiveness. This infiltration wasn't just a minor setback, it crippled Germany's ability to gather reliable information about enemy movements and new equipment. Without a functioning intelligence backbone, the German military found itself increasingly blind to the evolving battlefield realities, losing critical advantages in anticipating and countering Allied innovations. This collapse in intelligence created a dangerous blind spot, just as the Allies introduced unexpected and game-changing assets like the heavily armored Jumbo Sherman. By late 1944, the Allies had claimed the skies, and this dominance wasn't just about dogfights, it meant Germany's eyes above the battlefield were gone. The Luftwaffe's reconnaissance planes, once a constant threat, had been swept from the skies. Without them, German commanders were flying blind, unable to spot new enemy developments or movements from high above. This loss crippled their ability to gather vital intelligence on Allied forces, massing and advancing, leaving them to rely on outdated reports and guesswork. In a war where knowing your enemy's strength and position could mean life or death, losing aerial reconnaissance was a catastrophic blow to Germany's battlefield awareness. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, German forces found themselves blind to many critical movements. Without eyes in the sky over Allied supply depots and staging areas, they had no reliable way to spot new weapons or vehicles arriving on the continent. This lack of real-time intelligence left them vulnerable, fighting an enemy they couldn't fully see or understand. It meant that innovations like the heavily armored Jumbo Sherman slipped through undetected, catching German crews completely off guard. In the chaos of battle, not knowing what's coming next is often as dangerous as the enemy itself. By late 1944, Germany's human intelligence networks had been torn apart, leaving them blind to what was happening right under their noses. This collapse became painfully clear through the success of Operation Fortitude, the elaborate Allied deception that fooled German commanders into expecting an invasion where none was planned. Without spies in place, and with their traditional sources of information compromised, German forces found themselves increasingly in the dark. As the Allies prepared their next moves, this fatal intelligence gap meant that Germany was not just fighting a war on the front lines, but also losing the battle of awareness, and that would soon have devastating consequences. This breakdown reveals how the Jumbo's impact wasn't just about its steel plating, but also about the perfect storm of circumstances surrounding it. First, the tank's design closely mirrored the standard Sherman, making it visually nondescript on chaotic battlefields. At ranges where a gunner's decision lasts mere seconds, often clouded by smoke, terrain, or weather, the Jumbo appeared indistinguishable, just another Sherman vulnerable to the dreaded 88mm. Second, its scarcity meant German crews rarely encountered it. These few sightings were often dismissed as flukes, chalked up to bad shots or faulty ammunition, rather than a serious new threat. This combination of natural camouflage and confirmation bias created a blind spot in the German psyche, setting the stage for the shock to come. At first glance, the Jumbo looked just like any other M4 Sherman rolling onto the battlefield. This uncanny resemblance acted like a cloak of invisibility, hiding its extra heavy armor in plain sight. German gunners had seconds to make split-second decisions, and all they saw was the familiar silhouette of a tank they knew how to destroy. In the chaos of battle, spotting the difference was nearly impossible. That camouflage of familiarity wasn't just luck, it was a silent, natural shield that masked the Jumbo's true strength from the enemy's eyes. In the chaos of battle, every second counts. At ranges of several hundred meters, often cloaked in smoke, veiled by weather, or hidden behind rugged terrain, a German gunner had mere moments to spot a target. Quick judgment was essential. Was this just another Sherman, easily dispatched by an 88mm shell, or something else lurking beneath that familiar silhouette? There was no time for doubt. The pounding heart of the frontline soldier beat against uncertainty, as split-second decisions meant the difference between survival and annihilation. This frantic urgency shaped every shot fired, every command shouted, and every breath held before the thunderous crack of the gun. At a glance, the Jumbo looked like just another Sherman tank, completely familiar, completely non-threatening. German crews saw no difference. To them, it was the same silhouette, the same shape they'd destroyed countless times before with their deadly 88mm guns. That split-second decision to fire was automatic, grounded in hard-earned confidence. They didn't realize their shells would bounce off like pebbles on steel. This camouflage in plain sight meant the Jumbos could advance under enemy fire, soaking up hits their foes didn't expect any tank to survive. It was deception by design, a hidden advantage wrapped in familiar armor. But the Jumbo's rarity worked against the Germans in a very human way, a problem of confirmation bias. Seeing only a handful of these tanks scattered across the front, German crews dismissed reports of Shermans shrugging off hits as mistakes or flukes. After all, they knew the 88mm gun could penetrate any Allied armor, so when a shell bounced off, it challenged everything they believed. Instead of questioning their assumptions, they blamed poor aim or bad ammo, unknowingly ignoring a dangerous new threat right in front of them. The 254 Jumbo Shermans, though armored to defy the feared 88mm gun, were rare jewels scattered across the vast battlefield. Their encounters with German forces were fleeting and isolated, so uncommon that when a German crew witnessed a shell bouncing off what looked like a plain Sherman, disbelief quickly turned to doubt. Reports of these near-impossible survivals were dismissed as mistakes, bad aim, faulty rounds, or pure luck. In an environment where the legendary 88's lethality was gospel, few were ready to question their doctrine based on these sparse, enigmatic sightings. This rarity cloaked the Jumbo in a shroud of anonymity that proved to be its greatest strength. When a German anti-tank crew reported that their 88mm shell had bounced off a Sherman, disbelief was their greatest enemy. Such claims were met with harsh skepticism, not because the crews lacked courage, but because the 88mm gun was legendary, widely known as an unstoppable force. To admit that their most trusted weapon was failing on what looked like an ordinary Sherman was unimaginable. Commanders dismissed these reports as mistakes, poor aim, faulty ammunition, or misjudged distance. The steel certainty of the 88mm's lethality was a cornerstone of German tank doctrine, too deeply ingrained to be questioned lightly. This disbelief only deepened the Germans' blind spot, preventing them from recognizing that something new and dangerous had entered the battlefield. They were far more likely to be accused of poor marksmanship, misjudging the range, or using faulty ammunition than to be believed. After all, everyone trusted the 88mm's gun. It had been a sure killer time and again. So, when a shell bounced harmlessly off what looked like just another Sherman, doubt and denial took over. German crews couldn't accept that their trusted weapon was failing, especially against the familiar shape of an enemy tank they'd beaten countless times before. This skepticism was deadly. Reports of these rare bounces were dismissed, leaving the true threat of the Jumbo Sherman cloaked in secrecy, hidden in plain sight. The belief in the 88mm's gun's infallibility was more than just confidence. It was a cornerstone of German anti-tank warfare. Reports from the field that contradicted this hard truth were dismissed almost instinctively. German crews, faced with an 88-round bouncing harmlessly off a Sherman, were seen not as witnesses to a changing battlefield, but as the unfortunate victims of error-poor aim, bad range estimation, or faulty ammunition. This rigidity wasn't mere stubbornness, it was a psychological shield against unsettling reality. The entrenched conviction that the 88 could always kill blinded them to signs of something new, leaving German forces slow to adapt in the crucial moments when every second, every decision counted. German intelligence, already overwhelmed and starved of data, dismissed these incidents as statistical anomalies. Reports of 88mm shells bouncing off Sherman tanks were shrugged off, seen as flukes rather than warnings. The steadfast belief in the 88's lethal power was too deeply ingrained to be questioned on mere hearsay. This rigid mindset created a dangerous blind spot, blinding commanders and analysts alike to the emerging threat before them. Without reliable confirmation or a clear pattern, these rare encounters failed to spark the urgent review and adaptation that could have changed the tide on the battlefield. Despite mounting evidence from the battlefield, gun crews reporting shells bouncing off Shermans, the German command closed ranks around a comforting certainty: the 88mm gun was invincible. Instead of investigating these anomalies as signs of a new threat, they dismissed them as errors or bad luck. This failure to connect the dots wasn't just stubbornness, it was a symptom of a blinded intelligence apparatus, overwhelmed and starved for reliable information. The terrifying possibility that the Sherman's armor had been significantly upgraded simply didn't penetrate their collective mindset. Without adapting doctrine to this threat, the Germans remained blind to the Jumbo lurking amongst familiar silhouettes. The clash between German expectations and the reality of the Jumbo Sherman erupted spectacularly during the bitter Battle of the Bulge. German 88mm crews, long used to one-shot kills, found their shells rebounding harmlessly off these heavily armored beasts. The shock was immediate and profound. What was once an invincible weapon suddenly seemed ineffective. This moment shattered German confidence on the front line, turning what should have been routine victories into moments of confusion and hesitation. In the chaos of Ardennes winter, the Jumbo wasn't just a tank. It became a symbol that their technological edge was slipping, that the tides of war were shifting in unforgiving ways. Near Kringelt, Belgium, on December 18, 1944, under the gray winter sky, a seasoned German 88mm anti-tank gun crew crouched silently in ambush. Their eyes sharp, hearts steady, they thought this would be another routine kill. Ahead, an American Sherman tank steadily advanced across the open ground, unaware of the deadly trap. The crew's confidence was unshakable. Their weapon had never failed. They prepared to strike, ready to unleash destruction with a single, perfectly aimed shot. But what they didn't know was that this encounter would shatter their certainty and change everything. The German 88mm gun crew locks their sights on the approaching Sherman. Across open ground, the tank rolls steadily into view, an easy kill in their eyes. Confidence is absolute. The 88 has never failed them before. They prepare to fire, expecting the shell to shatter armor and end the threat instantly. Little do they know, this Sherman is no ordinary machine. It's the beginning of a lethal surprise that will shake their world. They fire a perfectly aimed shot. For a split second, the crew holds its breath. Then, instead of the expected explosion, the shell screams across the hull and bounces off. Like a knife against steel, their once invincible weapon has failed. Staring in stunned silence, the German gunner's confidence shatters. This isn't supposed to happen. The ironclad Sherman stands unscathed, mocking everything they believed about their deadly 88mm gun. The German crew's shock was palpable as they witnessed their 88mm shell ricochet harmlessly off the Sherman's hull, a moment that shattered their belief in the gun's invincibility. Years of battlefield supremacy, tested and proven, clashed with an unsettling new reality. Their minds raced to comprehend what had just happened, unable to reconcile the failure of a weapon once deemed unbeatable. This single ricochet wasn't just a fluke, it was a harbinger of a deeper tactical upheaval looming over the Western Front. This same scene unfolded repeatedly across the foggy, war-torn Ardennes front. Each time, German crews braced themselves for an easy kill, only to witness their deadly 88mm shells bounce harmlessly off what looked like just another Sherman tank. Confidence shattered, disbelief rippled through their ranks. A weapon once thought invincible suddenly faltered, leaving whispers of doubt and fear to spread like wildfire. This wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was the beginning of a psychological breakdown that would ripple through the heart of the German armored forces. Near Buchenbach, the Jumbo Shermans took the lead in a fierce American assault. These heavily armored giants absorbed relentless enemy fire, shrugging off hits that would have shattered ordinary Shermans. Their formidable presence bolstered the advance, allowing infantry and fellow tanks to press forward with renewed confidence. Time and again, the Jumbos demonstrated their ability to sustain punishment while pushing deep into German lines, turning the tide on that sector of the front. This was more than just tough armor, it was a new spearhead, breaking through defenses and rewriting what tanks could do on the battlefield. Despite taking multiple direct hits from both powerful 88mm and Panther 75mm rounds, these Jumbo Shermans remained operational, their reinforced armor absorbing what would have been fatal strikes on a standard Sherman. This resilience was staggering. Where regular tanks might be disabled or destroyed, the Jumbos kept pushing forward, acting as a battering ram against German defenses. Their ability to endure such punishment without faltering not only preserved the lives of their crews but also shifted the momentum in battle. Each sustained hit that failed to penetrate sent a shockwave through German ranks unseen, unyielding, and unstoppable. Their survival on the battlefield wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a game-changer. These Jumbo Shermans, coated in armor that defied the feared 88mm shells, steadily pushed forward while taking hits that would have spelled certain doom for standard tanks. In a pivotal clash near Buchenbach, their resilience directly enabled American forces to knock out a German Tiger II, turning the tide and forcing a retreat. This was more than metal meeting metal. It was a psychological blow that shook German confidence and gave the Americans a crucial edge in the brutal Ardennes fight. The psychological impact on the German forces was immediate and severe. Suddenly, the invincible 88mm gun no longer guaranteed kills, shattering the confidence of seasoned crews. Hesitation crept in as doubt took root. Was this Sherman somehow different? This fracture and uncertainty rippled through the ranks, breeding confusion and fear at every level. The 88's long-held reputation as an unbeatable weapon was being questioned under brutal, unforgiving fire. For the first time, German anti-tank teams faced a threat that forced them to rethink their tactics amidst the chaos of battle. Watching a Sherman tank absorb hits that should have been deadly shattered the German crew's confidence. Confusion spread like wildfire when rounds from their trusted 88mm guns bounced off the armor instead of penetrating it. Hesitation gripped Panzer and anti-tank crews alike, as the certainty they had relied on for years suddenly evaporated. This unexpected resilience sparked chaos in the ranks, leaving German gunners questioning their skills and the supposed invincibility of their weapons. Each failed shot wasn't just a missed kill, it was a blow to morale that rippled through the battlefield, undermining their psychological edge and forcing them to rethink everything they thought they knew about fighting the Sherman. Staff Sergeant William McVeigh's stand near Bastogne became a legend in its own right. His Jumbo Sherman was a fortress on tracks, ordered to hold a crucial crossroads under relentless assault. Time and again, German shells slammed into its thick armor, but the tank refused to fall. McVeigh's crew kept fighting, their resolve unshaken as their steel shield absorbed blow after blow. The Germans, baffled by this seemingly indestructible machine, began to doubt their own weapons. Eventually, they mistook his tank for a concrete pillbox, an immovable fortress, and chose to bypass it altogether. One tank, defying the odds, turned the tide in a vital corner of the Battle of the Bulge. Outnumbered and under relentless pressure, Staff Sergeant William McVeigh's single Jumbo Sherman was entrusted with holding a crucial crossroads. This wasn't just any position, it was vital ground that, if lost, could unravel the entire defense. Time and again, waves of German tanks and infantry surged forward, hammering at McVeigh's tank with armor-piercing shells and machine gun fire. Yet the Jumbo stood firm, its thick armor shrugging off blows that would have destroyed a standard Sherman in seconds. Each impact echoed a silent message. This was no ordinary tank. The Germans attacking it faced confusion and disbelief, struggling to understand how their deadliest weapons were failing to take it down. McVeigh's resolute defense was more than a physical barrier. It became a symbol of resilience, buying precious time and bolstering American morale when it mattered most. Staff Sergeant William McVeigh's Jumbo Sherman was a fortress on tracks. It took blow after blow, direct hits from powerful German anti-tank guns and relentless strikes from Panther and Tiger tanks alike. Each shell that slammed into its reinforced armor sparked a muffled thud, not the fiery explosion expected. Against all odds, McVeigh's tank stayed in the fight, refusing to yield. This resilience didn't just protect McVeigh and his crew, it became a beacon for nearby American forces. The Jumbo's stubborn survival shattered the German attackers' confidence, turning the tide in that desperate stand near Bastogne. Confusion swept through the German ranks. Their 88mm rounds, usually deadly, failed to penetrate this so-called Sherman. To them, it looked just like any other tank they'd faced countless times before. But now, it shrugged off hits that should have shattered it. No amount of fire could bring it down, and no one understood why. Their weapons that had once guaranteed victory were suddenly impotent. This bafflement didn't just slow them, it shook their confidence to its core. They were facing a ghost in familiar armor, and it was rewriting the rules of the battlefield right before their eyes. In their confusion and frustration, German troops struggled to make sense of the Jumbo's resilience. Unable to fathom that it was just another Sherman tank, they convinced themselves they were facing a solid concrete pillbox, an immovable fortress rather than a machine. This misidentification stalled their assault, sowing hesitation where ruthless aggression was needed most. The psychological impact was profound. What should have been a straightforward kill turned into a paralyzing mystery, upending their battlefield assumptions and buying precious time for the Americans to hold the line. Rather than waste time and resources on a stubborn target, the Germans made a critical choice. They bypassed the seemingly impenetrable pillbox, surrendering control of a pivotal crossroads to just one American tank. This decision echoed far beyond that single intersection, revealing the profound confusion and caution sowed by an enemy that refused to fall as expected. It was a moment where uncertainty replaced confidence, and a lone Jumbo Sherman quietly tipped the scales in the brutal game of war. For American crews, the Jumbo was a revelation. Suddenly, they had a tank that felt nearly invincible from the front, a rare sanctuary amid the brutal uncertainty of tank warfare. This wasn't just armor, it was a confidence boost, a shield that allowed them to push forward where before they might have hesitated or retreated. The Jumbo gave commanders a new tool to lead charges, to hold ground fiercely, and to shield their comrades. In the chaos of battle, this tough giant became a lifeline, multiplying survivability and emboldening entire units to fight harder and smarter. It provided a level of protection that sparked a bold new confidence in its crews, a shield that let them fight without hesitation, almost daring the enemy to come closer. Aggression replaced caution as Jumbo commanders led their units from the front, their resolve bolstered by armored invincibility. This newfound bravery transformed how they approached battle. No longer just survivors, they became fearless spearheads, breaking through enemy lines with a vigor that standard Sherman simply couldn't match. The Jumbo, in these moments, was more than a tank. It was a symbol of hope and strength, inspiring not just its crew but entire platoons who witnessed its resilience under fire. With the Jumbo leading the charge, commanders could finally push forward with a boldness that standard Shermans simply couldn't afford. These tanks weren't just participants, they were vanguards, breaking through enemy lines where hesitation once ruled. Their heavy armor absorbed punishing fire, letting crews spearhead assaults that before would have been suicidal gambits. This newfound confidence transformed the battlefield, turning cautious advances into aggressive drives and giving American units a critical edge that reshaped the fight in their favor. The Jumbo's heavy armor wasn't just steel, it was a shield that transformed how soldiers fought and survived. Crews trusted it to absorb blows that would have destroyed a standard Sherman. That confidence radiated through entire units, turning caution into boldness. Facing deadly German fire, these tanks led the way, their resilience multiplying the chances of survival for every soldier they carried. The Jumbo wasn't just a tank, it was a fortress on tracks, a beacon of hope that emboldened troops to push forward, rewriting the rules of armored combat in real time. Though still exposed from the sides and rear, and limited by its standard 75mm gun, the Jumbo's thick, nearly impenetrable frontal armor forced a fundamental rethink. Suddenly, German gunners faced a harsh reality. Their dreaded 88mm rounds might no longer guarantee an easy kill. This tank wasn't just another Sherman, it was a fortress that changed the battlefield calculus. Commanders had to rethink tactics, while crews gained newfound confidence charging headfirst into danger that once meant certain death. The Jumbo stood as a testament to how armor, even with compromises, could shift the balance in war's brutal game. captured German after-action reports from this period reveal a mounting sense of confusion and frustration. Commanders and crews alike struggled to understand why their trusted 88mm shells, once regarded as unstoppable, were now bouncing off American tanks that looked and should have felt completely vulnerable. These anomalous failures forced them to second-guess everything they thought they knew about their weapons and tactics. Internal communications shifted from confident assertions to nervous speculation, with some officers beginning to doubt the reliability of their own ammunition or the abilities of their gunners. This growing fog of uncertainty struck at the very heart of German armored doctrine, shaking morale and breeding hesitation on the battlefield where split-second decisions were the difference between life and death. Internal memos beginning to leak through German command acknowledged a troubling truth. Their previously invincible 88mm rounds were proving unreliable against the frontal armor of time's sometimes Sherman tanks. This admission was profound, an undeniable crack in the foundation of their anti-tank confidence. Yet, instead of overhauling tactics, the memos urged gunners to focus fire on tracks and flanks just in case. It was a desperate, partial concession, born from begrudging battlefield realities rather than clear understanding. This moment marked the beginning of growing chaos and uncertainty among German crews, who had long trusted their 88mm as an unstoppable force, but now faced a ghost on the battlefield that refused to die, a tank that defied the rules they lived by. As reports flooded in, German commanders scrambled to recalibrate their tactics. The once trusted 88mm gun was no longer guaranteed to deliver a kill with a single shot. These desperate memos urged gunners to abandon their long-range precision strikes aimed at the front and instead target the vulnerable tracks and flanks of Sherman tanks. It was a hazy admission that their battlefield certainty was eroding. Yet, even this shift was tinged with uncertainty, an act of cautious hope rather than confident strategy. Every missed kill hammered home the brutal reality. The era of German invincibility was slipping away, one ricochet at a time. This admission cracked the very foundation of German anti-tank doctrine, a belief so deeply held it was nearly unshakable. But by the time they recognized their trusty 88mm gun might fail against some Shermans, the moment for decisive change had slipped away. Panic and doubt crept into their ranks. But shattered confidence can't be rebuilt overnight. The Germans found themselves stuck, scrambling to adapt too late. While the Jumbo Shermans quietly reshaped the battlefield around them, the German forces scrambled to respond, but their reaction was patchy and fragmented, localized, rather than strategic. Instead of a coordinated army-wide shift in tactics, individual units were left to fend for themselves, adapting piecemeal as best they could. This reactive stance illustrated the collapse of Germany's once formidable command and intelligence networks. Without comprehensive data or clear directives, anti-tank crews resorted to cautious guesswork, often aiming for the Sherman's vulnerable flanks or tracks out of sheer desperation. Yet these efforts were mere band-aids on a sinking ship, unable to restore their shattered confidence or reverse the growing tactical disadvantage. The 88mm's aura of invincibility had been pierced, but the German army lacked the cohesion and insight needed to heal that wound. By late 1944, the German army was racing against time and failing. Their intelligence system was in ruins, unable to gather reliable battlefield information or analyze new threats. Even as reports trickled in about Sherman's shrugging off 88mm hits, there was no centralized effort to update tactics or doctrine. Without a functional network to process these lessons, the army was forced to cling to old assumptions. This deadly inertia left German commanders reacting piecemeal, never grasping the full scope of the Jumbo Sherman's impact. In a war where adaptation was survival, Germany's intelligence collapse sealed the fate of countless crews and their once-feared 88mm guns. The myth of the 88mm's unbreakable dominance was shattered in an instant. Like a shattered mirror, German confidence fractured as their once infamous weapon failed to pierce the Jumbo's armor. But this wasn't just about tanks. It was the slow unraveling of a system already stretched thin. Germany's intelligence and logistics were crumbling, unable to regroup or react. The invincibility of the 88 could not be restored, not because the gun itself had changed, but because the entire foundation supporting it was collapsing under the weight of war. The M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman didn't single-handedly win the war. Its numbers were too few, its impact too limited to change the grand course of history alone. Yet, in the chaos of late 1000, 944, and early 1000, 945. The Jumbo symbolized something far bigger, a breakthrough in armor design born from necessity, ingenuity, and industrial strength. It proved that even a small, well-targeted innovation could unsettle an enemy's confidence, disrupt their tactics, and create life-saving opportunities on the battlefield. The Jumbo's story reminds us that war isn't only won by sheer firepower or numbers, but also by adaptability, the ability to learn fast, and sometimes by outsmarting your opponent through unexpected means. Though just 254 units strong, the Jumbo Shermans were a drop in the ocean compared to the staggering nearly 50,000 standard Shermans churned out by American factories. Strategically, they weren't game changers in sheer numbers, but their rarity underscored a powerful truth. Sometimes, it's not about how many you have, but how you use them, and the psychological ripples they send through the enemy ranks. In the vast tide of war machines, these few heavily armored tanks carved out a unique legacy, standing as a testament to American industrial prowess and battlefield ingenuity in the face of one of World War II's greatest armored threats. By early 1945, the outcome was clear. The Allies' victory was sealed. Their overwhelming industrial capacity turned out endless tanks and supplies. Logistical networks stretched efficiently across continents, ensuring steady reinforcements. Air superiority ruled the skies, crippling German movements below. All these factors combined made the German defeat inevitable. The war was no longer just a clash of weapons, but a testament to the power of sustained production, organization, and control of the air. It was a tipping point where sheer might outmatched even the best technology or tactics on the battlefield. But the Jumbo's story offers more than just a tale of steel and firepower. It reveals something deeper about late war combat. It shows how adaptability, intelligence, and the ability to seize a fleeting window can shape outcomes just as much as tanks and guns. This was a time when rigid doctrines cracked under pressure, and the fog of war blurred even the simplest truths. The Jumbo stands as a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful weapon on the battlefield isn't technology itself, but the capacity to recognize change and act on it swiftly. It stands as a powerful example of how a limited, expedient technological solution can have an outsized tactical and psychological impact. In the chaos of war, innovation isn't always about creating the most advanced weapon, it's about adapting quickly to the challenges on the ground. The Jumbo Sherman wasn't perfect, but it shattered expectations, forcing the enemy to question everything they thought they knew. This moment reveals a timeless truth. Sometimes, it's not raw technology that wins battles, but the ability to exploit the enemy's blind spots and rigidity. The Jumbo reminds us that even a small change, cleverly applied, can ripple outward, shaking the foundations of an entire conflict. What made the Jumbo Sherman truly formidable was how it capitalized on the enemy's rigid tactics and the severe breakdown in German intelligence. The Germans were stuck in their old ways, unable to adjust their strategies quickly. Meanwhile, the Jumbo slipped quietly onto the battlefield, masked by its familiar silhouette. This perfect storm of inflexibility and ignorance gave the Americans a brief but crucial window of surprise, an edge that shifted firefights and saved countless lives. It's a vivid reminder. Sometimes, outsmarting your opponent's mindset can be far more powerful than simply outgunning them. This unexpected advantage did more than just protect soldiers. It broke the enemy's spirit. German crews, once confident in their unbeatable 88mm guns, now faced the unnerving reality that their shells could bounce harmlessly off these tanks. It sowed doubt where there had been certainty, hesitation where there had been aggression. In the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge, this shift in morale disrupted German tactics and forced them into defensive confusion. What seemed like just another tank at first glance suddenly became a symbol of resilience, a testament to how a well-crafted surprise could change the course of a fierce battle. This failure to spot the Jumbo Sherman wasn't just one dumb mistake, it was a flashing red sign of something far worse. It exposed the deep unraveling of German command and control, a collapse that went beyond just missing one tank variant. The very systems meant to gather intelligence, analyze threats, and adjust tactics were breaking down. It was like a once efficient machine hitting rust and grit, grinding to a painful halt right when adaptability mattered most. In essence, missing the Jumbo was a symptom, a snapshot of a much larger, systemic decay eating away at Germany's ability to wage an effective war as the Allies closed in. By late 1944, the German war machine was unraveling in unexpected ways. It wasn't just the relentless Allied attacks wearing them down, it was a systemic failure to see, to understand, to adapt. Their industrial output was strained to the breaking point, unable to replace losses quickly enough. Their intelligence agencies, once sharp and feared, had become hamstrung, riddled with infiltration, and crippled by fear. This breakdown meant that new Allied innovations, like the Jumbo Sherman, slipped through their defenses unnoticed, catching them off guard time and time again. Without the ability to observe and learn from these shifts, Germany was fighting blind against a rapidly changing battlefield. And in war, that blindness can be fatal. The impact of the Jumbo Sherman extended far beyond the battlefield. Its rugged endurance and surprising resilience forced a serious rethink in American armored warfare. Post-war doctrines didn't just consider firepower or speed, they embraced the balanced triad of protection, mobility, and firepower, a philosophy reflecting lessons hard-earned in combat. Tanks like the M46 and the M4A3E2 Patton series were born from this new understanding, embodying the Jumbo's legacy of adaptability and toughness. In this way, a tank born out of necessity, and imperfect in many ways, helped shape the future of American armor, proving that sometimes innovation forged in the crucible of war can leave a lasting imprint on military thinking. The M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman underscored a vital lesson that still echoes through armored warfare today. Success demands a careful balance between protection, mobility, and firepower. Too much armor might keep a tank alive longer, but if it loses speed and agility, it becomes a sitting target. Likewise, overwhelming firepower is wasted if the tank can't survive a hit long enough to get a shot off. The Jumbo's design struck a challenging compromise. It bolstered frontal armor enough to withstand the feared 88mm round, yet compromised mobility and firepower by retaining the 75mm gun and battling extra weight. This balance and the tough choices it forced would shape American tank design philosophy well beyond World War II, influencing the next generations of tanks that sought to adapt to ever-evolving battlefields. This philosophy wasn't just theory, it was a blueprint for the future. Tanks like the M46 and M4A3E2 Patton embodied a new American balance of firepower, armor, and mobility. They learned from the humble Jumbo's lesson: protection alone wasn't enough. A tank had to move, strike, and survive under relentless pressure. This evolution shaped decades of armored warfare, proving that true strength came not from any single technological marvel, but from adapting to the realities of the battlefield, a legacy born from a tank that quietly rewrote what it meant to be a survivor. More importantly, it represented American industrial flexibility at its best. Faced with urgent battlefield challenges, American engineers didn't wait for perfect solutions, they adapted swiftly, modifying existing tanks to meet the moment's demands. This ability to pivot quickly ensured that frontline troops received vital upgrades without delay, turning a standard Sherman into a battle-tested juggernaut. In the chaos of war, such ingenuity was a force multiplier, transforming limitations into advantages. The Jumbo Sherman embodied this spirit of rapid innovation, proving that sometimes the real power lies not just in technology itself, but in the capacity to evolve and implement it when it matters most. The Jumbo wasn't just a tank, it was a testament to American ingenuity and adaptability. Faced with urgent battlefield demands, engineers took a familiar chassis and transformed it into a heavily armored fortress, even if improvised. This rapid innovation gave soldiers a vital advantage, a fighting edge that bolstered their confidence under fire. It showed that sometimes success isn't about having the most advanced technology, but about how quickly and effectively you can respond to new challenges when it matters most. For the German gunners, witnessing their mighty 88mm rounds bounce harmlessly off the Jumbo's armor was a stark, undeniable sign. Their technological edge was slipping away. More than just a machine, the Jumbo symbolized a larger reality that no matter how advanced your weapons might be, without sharp intelligence and the ability to adapt, supremacy can evaporate. History echoes this lesson again and again. From the Spartan phalanx standing firm against cavalry to the Allies cracking the Enigma code, success often came not from the flashiest weapon, but from outthinking the enemy and evolving faster than the battlefield itself. The Jumbo's story reminds us that true power lies in the mind, and that technology alone can never guarantee victory.